friends. I'm here in my classroom. Can you hear the voices of my super cute students say hello?
Hello.
And we are here for Dyslexia and ADHD Awareness Month with a full read aloud of my absolute number one favorite story that celebrates a student with dyslexia. Okay, so this story is called Thank You, Mr. Falker, and it is by Patricia Polacco. We read a story yesterday called Junkyard Wonders. This one is Thank You, Mr. Falker. So are you guys ready?
Yes.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. And the illustrations are also by Patricia Polacco. Okay? And we have a juicy little nugget of information at the end to tell you. Okay? To George Falker, the real Mr. Falker, you will forever be my hero. So on this page, we see a picture of a book and some honey. What? The grandpa held the jar of honey so that all the family could see, then dipped a ladle into it and drizzled honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. Stand up, little one, he cooed. I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you. Then he handed the book to her. Taste. She dipped her finger into the honey and put it into her mouth. What is that taste? The grandma asked. The little girl answered, sweet. Then all of the family said in a single voice, yes, and so is knowledge, but knowledge is like the bee that made the sweet honey. You have to chase it through the pages of a book. The little girl knew that the promise to read was at last hers. Soon she was going to learn to read. Because before we go to kindergarten or grade 1, that's what we're told, right? We're all going to learn to read this year. But does that happen for everybody? No. So here she is. Look at this beautiful artwork. I love it so much. Can you see? Yeah. Trisha, the littlest girl in the family, grew up loving books. Her school teacher mother read to her every night. Her red-headed brother brought his books home from school and shared them. And whenever she visited the family farm, her grandfather or grandmother read to her by the stone fireplace. When she turned 5 and went to kindergarten, most of all she hoped to read. Each day she saw the kids in the first grade across the hall reading. And before the year was over, some of the kids in her own class began to read. Not Trisha. Still, she loved being at school because she could draw. The other kids would crowd around her and watch her do magic with the crayons. In first grade, you'll learn to read, said her brother. Don't worry about it. Next year. How many people have said that to you? If that wasn't your journey in kindergarten, they'd say, next year you'll learn. Don't worry about it.
I don't like that one said that to me.
Next year will be fine. You'll get it. Okay? In first grade, Trisha sat in a circle with the other kids. They were all holding Our Neighborhood, their first reader, sounding out letters and words. They said oi, boy, and look. The teacher smiled at them when they put all the sounds together and got a word right. But when Trisha looked at a page, all she saw were wiggly shapes, and when she tried to sound out words, the other kids laughed at her. Trisha, what are you looking at in that book, they'd say. I'm reading, she'd say back to them. So how many of you, no, not right now. How many of you have looked at a page who struggle with reading and it just all seems like gobbledygook? And it just seems overwhelming. Not right now. We'll wait to the end of the story, please. It just seems like a sea of symbols, right? How many people have pretended that they were reading in class and they weren't really? Yep, absolutely. Because you don't want to be, you may go, come right back quickly, please. You don't want to be the one that's like looking like you're not reading like the other kids in your class. How did that feel? Good. Not very good, I bet. I betcha. Okay. But her teacher would move on to the next person. Always when it was her turn to read, her teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up into the second reader and third reader, she stayed alone in Our Neighborhood. Trisha began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. Because are we told that our success in reading is what makes you smart?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is that true?
No.
It is not, my friends. The harder words got for the little girl, the more and more time she spent drawing, how she loved to draw, or just sitting and dreaming, or when she could, going for walks with her grandmother. One summer day, she and her grandma were walking together in the small woods behind their farm. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming up from the grasses. As they walked, Tricia said, "Grandma, do you think I'm different?" This is the artwork of her and the grandma walking. I love this. "Do you think I'm different?" "Of course," her grandma answered. "To be different is the miracle of life. You see all of those little fireflies? Everyone is different." "Do you think I'm smart?" Tricia didn't feel smart. Can you stop that, please? The tapping, honey. Her grandma hugged her. "You are the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever." Right then, the little girl felt safe in her grandma's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. I have a pep talk for you about focusing on other things when kids can't learn to read than just besides the fact that they cannot read. Please find all the wonderful things that they can do, not the fact that they cannot read. So many cool things. All right, here we go. Next, look at this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. They're laying in the grass looking up at the stars. So cool. Tricia's grandma used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming from the other side. And she used to say that someday she would be on the other side where the light comes from. One evening they lay on the grass together and counted the lights from heaven. "You know," her grandma said, "all of us will go there someday. Hang on to the grass or you'll lift right off the ground and there you'll be." They laughed and both of them hung on to the grass. But it was not long after that night that her grandma must have let go of the grass because she went to where the lights were on the other side. And not long after that, Tricia's grandpa let go of the grass too. School seemed harder and harder for her now.
So sad.
Sad. But I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it, like letting go of the grass and just being on the other side of the light. It's kind of a beautiful way of looking at someone passing away, isn't it? Okay, so here she is back at school, the next grade. Whew. Reading was just plain torture. When Sue Ellen read her page or Tommy Bob read his page, they read so easily that Tricia would watch the top of their heads to see if something was happening to their heads that wasn't happening to hers. Something happening to the top of their heads that's not happening to mine? And numbers were the hardest thing of all to read. She never added anything right. Did you know that many people with dyslexia also struggle with numbers? Yeah, it's very common. Line the numbers up before you add them, the teacher would say. But when Tricia tried, the numbers looked like a stack of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She just knew she was dumb. Then one day, her mother announced that she had gotten a teaching job in California. Ooh. A long way from the family farm in Michigan. And this is kind of back in the day where everyone sat in rows and you had to listen, you couldn't move, and it was very strict in school back then. Okay, here they are I love this picture. They're on their adventure. What can you tell by the drawing of what time in history this is? Does it seem like it's modern day, like right now? 60s to 70s? When do you think this might be? The 80s? Look at their clothes.
70s.
70s?
70s. 70s.
She's wearing like a bonnet in her hair in the back.
I wear a bonnet when I go to sleep. I do.
Even though her grandma and grandpa were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe, though, the teachers and kids in her new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She said her mother and brother moved across the country in a two-tone 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days.
I would love to have that car.
This is a pretty sweet car. Absolutely. Okay, this is a pretty shocking image here, isn't it? Do you see it? What's she doing? What's she doing here? She's crying. She's holding her hand over her mouth. What might be happening? Yeah, because we see some boys in the back being mean to her. Absolutely. But at the new school, it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over her words. The cat, and she was reading like a baby in the 3rd grade. And when her teacher read along with them and called on Tricia for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. "Hey, dummy," a boy called out to her on the playground. "How come you're so dumb?" Other kids stood near him and they laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning in her eyes, how she longed to go back to her grandparents' farm in Michigan. I see a friendly face. I see a friendly face. Who might this be?
Mr.
Mr. Falker. Do you always know when you can see a kind teacher or a kind grown-up? Do you just kind of know when they're kind? Yeah. Thanks, pal. Now, Trisha wanted to go to the school less and less. I have a sore throat, she'd say to her mother, or I have a stomach ache. How many of you didn't pretend to be sick, but often felt actually sick going to school because you were stressed out about going?
Definitely.
That happened?
The first day I came here, I was like, I could barely sleep the day before I came here. But the first day that I came here, as soon as I came here, I was off my.
You were good to go? So does sometimes belly aches and headaches and all that stuff happen when you're stressed and you're feeling not confident? Yeah, it can show up in your body. She dreamed more and more and drew more and more, and she hated school. Then, when Trisha started 5th grade, the school was all abuzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants. He wore the neatest clothes. All the usual teachers' pets gathered around him. Stevie Joe and Alice Marie, Davy and Michael Lee. But right from the start, it didn't seem to matter to Mr. Falker which kids were the cutest or the smartest or the best anything. Why is that good that teacher kind of doesn't care if a kid is the smartest, the best, or he's just treating everyone the same? Why is that good, Eden?
So everyone can get the help that they need?
Yeah, being neutral and choosing to respect all kids no matter what is a beautiful thing. Okay. Mr. Falker would stand behind Trisha whenever she was drawing and whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he'd say this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings, but they still laughed whenever she gave a wrong answer. Then, one day she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She was stumbling through a page in Charlotte's Web, and the page was going all fuzzy when the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Falker, in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie, said, "Stop! Are all of you so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" Yes, Mr. Falker. You go. All right, I'm seeing something again here with maybe, I'm thinking, what do you think?
Getting bullied.
Do you think this is that bully again? That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her, all except Eric. He had sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, but he seemed almost to hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned in her face and called her Toad. Trisha was afraid to turn any corner for fear Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was really happy was when she was around Mr. Falker. He let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and he looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. How do you think Mr. Falker made her feel?
Good.
Safe, right?
Secure.
Secure. What a great word, Eden. Can we get a 5-finger woohoo for that? Woohoo! All right, guys. Stay focused over here, please. Eyeballs up here, please. Do you need to go, honey? Of course, honey. But the nicer Mr. Falker was to Trisha, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground or in the cafeteria or even in the bathroom and to jump out and call her stupid or ugly. And Trisha began to believe them. She discovered that if she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess, she could hide under the inside stairwell during the free time and not have to go outside at all. In that dark place, she felt completely safe. So here she is hiding. She's hiding. Yeah, Stella.
Or I feel like it's a little bit of both. Why Mr. Falker is kind of like nice. I feel like she feels like good, but also I feel like sometimes she feels like he's giving her more attention because it doesn't really feel good when you get all the attention.
Okay.
So I feel like she feels mixed
Mixed feelings? Very good, Stella. Yes, Willie's.
I think that the bully bullies her because
Maybe, that's a good point.
because he has a hard time
Okay.
and he doesn't like that Mr. Falker treats her a little different.
Yeah, that could be all of those things could be true. I like that. But one day at recess, Eric followed her to her secret hiding place. Have you become a mole? He laughed and he pulled her out into the hall and danced around her. Dumbbell, dumbbell, maggoty old dumbbell. Trisha buried her head in her arms and curled up in a ball. Suddenly she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Falker. He marched Eric down to the office. When he came back, he found Trisha. I don't think you'll have to worry about that boy again, he said softly. What was he teasing you about, little one? I don't know, Trisha shrugged. So there, Mr. Falker has caught him finally teasing her. And finally, this bully is going to get taken care of, right? Absolutely. Okay, let's check it out. What do we think we see happening here?
Is he helping?
There's a chalkboard, blackboard, right? Trisha was sure Mr. Falker believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the kid next to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Falker to help her with a sentence. Then she'd say the same thing that he did. Good, he would say. Then one day, Mr. Falker asked her to stay after school and help wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches as they worked and talked. All at once, he said, let's play a game. I'll shout out letters, you write them on the board with the wet sponge as quickly as you can. A, he shouted. She wiped a watery A. 8, he shouted. She made a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q. He shouted. He shouted out many, many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Trisha knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run. But Mr. Falker caught her arm and sank to his knees in front of her. You poor baby, he said. You think you're dumb, don't you? How awful for you to be so lonely and afraid, she sobbed. But little one, don't you understand? Don't you see letters or numbers? You don't see letters or numbers the way other people do. And you've gotten through school all this time and fooled many, many good teachers. He smiled at her. That took cunning and smartness and such bravery. Then he stood up and finished washing the board. We're going to change all that, girl. You're going to read. I promise you that. So I want to share that with you. Many of you have done the same thing. You have learned little tricks, little things that you do, right, to sort of make up for the fact that you can't always read everything. That actually means you're very, very smart. Do you know that? Yeah. But a time will come, just like this with this wonderful teacher, that you can't hide it any longer, right? And it's super important that you do learn. So teachers, parents out there, beware. Your kids are very smart. They may have memorized many words. Is memorizing reading?
Yes.
No. Memorizing is not reading. Memorizing is almost like a snapshot in your brain of the shapes. That's not real reading. So memorizing and saying what other people are saying are all strategies that our struggling readers do because they're very smart. But we owe them the gift of teaching them to read the right way, okay? Now, almost every day after school, she met with Mr. Falker and Miss Plessy, a reading teacher. They did a lot of things she didn't even understand. At first, she made circles in sand, and then big sponge circles on the blackboard, going from left to right, left to right. Another day, they flicked letters on a screen, and Trisha shouted them out loud. Still, other days, she worked with wooden blocks and built words. Letters, letters, letters. Words, words, words. Yes! Let's say it together. Letters, letters, letters. Words, words, words. Mm-hmm. Always sounding them out, and that felt good. But though she'd read words, she hadn't read a whole sentence, and deep down, she still felt dumb. And then one day, you ready for it? This is it. Then one day, it had been 3 months or 4 months since they had started. Mr. Falker put a book in front of her. She'd never seen it before. He picked a paragraph in the middle of a page and pointed at it, almost as if it were magic, or as if light poured into her brain. The words and sentences started to take shape on the page as they never had before. She marched them off too. Slowly, she read a sentence, then another, and finally, she'd read a paragraph, and she understood the whole thing. She didn't notice that Mr. Falker and Miss Plessy had tears in their eyes. There she is with a book in her hand. That night, Trisha ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up the front steps, threw open her front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up on the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went in the living room and found the book on a shelf, the very book that her grandpa had shown her so many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover, tasted the sweetness, and said to herself, the honey, let's try and say this together. The honey is sweet, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a good book. She held the book, honey and all, close to her chest. She could feel tears roll down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. She was happy, so very happy. So get this, are you ready? The rest of the year became an odyssey of discovery and adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school. I know this because that little girl was me, Patricia Palaco. I saw Mr. Falker again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked up to him and introduced myself. At first, he had difficulty placing me. Then I told him who I was and how he had changed my life so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I did for a living. Why, Mr. Falker, I answered, I make books for children. Thank you, Mr. Falker. Thank you. Bum, bum, bum. This is a true story. She is Trisha from the book. She is Trisha from the book. Oh my goodness. Thanks.